For you to, one, talk a little bit about your book, and then Lodro is going to guide us through a mindful meditation. I'm very excited about that.
Thank you. So it's wonderful to be here with you all today in LA. This is one of the first cities that I've been going to for The Buddha Walks Into the Office, which is, it's not even a month old yet, but thankfully still it's doing quite well. And this is the book that I wrote immediately after I finished the Buddha Walks Into a Bar tour. And I went to 36 cities for that, which I will never do again. But an interesting thing happens when you write a book called The Buddha Walks Into a Bar, which is afterwards, anyone that knows you says, you know what we should do right now? We should go to a bar. But what happens when you go to the bar with your friends? You talk about work. So it felt like a natural progression where a lot of the younger people that I would hang out with, the question became, okay, this meditation practice is good, but how does it help me figure out what I want to do with my life and find meaningful work, personally meaningful work? And then there are people who I went out with and that might have been a little bit older and had their idea of that sort of squared away, and they said, well, exactly what Susie was saying, how do we deal with the jerks? How do I deal with the office gossip and slander? How do I deal with my boss who I just can't get along with? And it's a toxic work environment. I was in Salt Lake City yesterday, and a woman asked me exactly that. She said, I can't get along with my boss. The whole environment's toxic. And the question then becomes, how much can we show up at work in a way that's authentic, in a way that has the ability that we can actually open our heart to others? So there's a Sanskrit term I use in here, which is bodhicitta. Bodhi can be translated as open or awake, citta, heart or mind. And the question is, how much do we actually walk into a situation with that sense of openness, that awake heart? And so that when we sit down in a meeting, we're not saying, you're a jerk, I like you, but I'm just going to try and be really open and accommodating to these people that I'm working with. So if you look up the term equanimity in the dictionary, it's mental calmness or composure, especially in the midst of difficult circumstances. And I love that because people, they come to meditation studios like this and they say, I want equanimity. But they forget that you can't just have mental calmness without all of that crap that goes on at the workplace and in your family and in your relationship and in your all these sorts of things. So it's the idea that we actually can cultivate the positive qualities that we want to cultivate in the midst of these difficult circumstances. That's the idea of equanimity. So as I was saying before, we shouldn't have to break our life into compartments. This is family time, this is work time, this is spiritual time. But the spirituality should actually be able to infiltrate all of the various moments day to day. So the practice we'll do later, shamatha, calm abiding, is a practice that sort of, the more you do it, the more it naturally seeps into your daily life. And it's a practice of just becoming really present with something as simple as the breath. That's it. I actually went to an event recently, ABC correspondent Dan Harris has been talking a lot about meditation because he had this moment when he was on camera and suffered a very terrible panic attack, and he knew something had to change. And I've actually been encountering a lot of people like this. They hit a certain point in their career, and something manifests, like all the stress they've been carrying manifests, and they can't do what they do, or they can't do it as they have in the past. So he found meditation. And he said, listen, it's shockingly simple. You just sit there and you're with your breath. That's it. And people want to make things very complicated, but this particular meditation that we're going to do is just that simple. It's just coming back to the breath as an anchor into the present moment. So that when you're in your day-to-day life and you notice that you're completely distracted, you can come back to what's going on right in front of you. So there's something very practical about this, which is why I think we're seeing this giant upswing in mindfulness meditation becoming really accessible to people, because it's actually really helpful. I don't think anyone shows up at work and is like, I want to slog my way through this and not pay any attention and be inauthentic. I think everyone wakes up with the idea of, I actually want to show up and be my best self. So meditation helps with that. It helps you be your best self at work. I want to return to something I said a little while ago, because one aspect, I would say half of this book really, is that sense of figuring out what you want to do with yourself and what's meaningful in terms of your work environment, your meaningful work. And I think, you know, I'm here with my sister and my brother-in-law, and they have kids, and my nephew is a teenager. And I asked him if he knew what he wanted to be when he grows up, and he said no. And it's such a wonderful thing because it doesn't matter to him, you know? He doesn't have to think about it right now, but then in a couple of years, more and more people are going to keep asking him this question to the point that he's going to feel the pressure to feel like he has to know exactly what he wants to do. And then as that goes, for many of us, it becomes this overbearing question of like, I haven't figured it out yet. So I like to say this question of like, what do you want to be when you grow up becomes really tricky, because I think when you're a teenager, you think someone in their 20s has grown up and they figured it out. And then I think people in their 20s are like, well, in my 30s, you know, I might even be married, and then I'll have it figured out. And then people in their 30s, and it continues on and on. So to quote Benjamin Franklin, you know, when we're finished changing, we're finished. The idea here is like, we just keep thinking we're gonna figure it out. And that's because I think we're asking the wrong question. It shouldn't be what do you want to do, it should be who do you want to be when you grow up, knowing that we're constantly growing up, we're constantly changing. So basing a life around that, I think, could be really interesting. I remember as part of that, the Buddha Walks into a Bar tour, I did a lot of university speaking. I went to Yale, and I was being shown around campus by this woman. And she was 22, she was about to graduate in a couple months. I'm very careful with people who are about to graduate because I don't want to be that guy that says like, what are you going to do with your life? I said, have you given any thought to where you might live in a couple of months? And she said, it's so funny you asked me that at a Starbucks, because I want to be the CMO, the Chief Marketing Officer of Starbucks. I said, oh, okay. That's very interesting and specific. Tell me more. So I asked a lot of questions about that. I got to know a little bit about her intentions around that. And then I did the event, and I was talking with people after. Another woman approached me, also about to graduate. Same question. Where do you think you might go? I don't know what I want to do. I don't know where I want to go. I know I want to help people, but I'm not sure what that means, and it's scary, and I think that's okay. I said, no, of course it's okay. You know, that's great. And because there's such polar opposite answers within a span of 2 hours, they really stayed with me, and I traveled and I kept thinking about it. And this was part of writing the book, that I realized this woman who wants to be the CMO of Starbucks, there's how many billion people in the world? And there's one CMO, right, of this industry. So she could spend decades moving into marketing, even moving into Starbucks and working in the marketing team there and then rising in the ranks. And there's two ways this plays out. One, she doesn't get it, in which case she's disappointed and she spent decades pursuing a dream that didn't pan out. Or two, she gets it and maybe she doesn't want it. Maybe she wants to be CEO. Maybe she wants to have been paid better. Maybe she feels like she's working more hours than she should. Maybe she neglected important family moments along the way, or didn't take the time to start her own family. There's so many ways that could have gone wrong. So many variations that I actually worried for that person with that very fixed idea of this is what it would take for me to be personally satisfied at work. Now let's take the other person. She says, I want to help others. I don't know what else I want to do. There's 1,000 different things that person could do. She could be a social worker, she could be a teacher, she could go into nonprofits, she could do any number of things. She could work in a giant corporate structure, but be that person who really advocates for the little guy, whatever. No matter what, she would build a life around that intention. So how much can we build our life and our livelihoods around the qualities we want to cultivate, such as kindness, such as being present, such as being generous, and then let that infiltrate all the various aspects of our life, part of which is our work, but also our family and our hobbies and all these other things. So there's an exercise in here around building a mandala, a sort of traditional framework for your life that's based around the qualities that you want to cultivate, who you want to be, as opposed to just what you want to do, letting that inform the livelihood question. So that's one part, and then the other part is, all of those aspects of work and leadership that we're called to every day. And I started something about a year and a half ago called the Institute for Compassionate Leadership, which is a nonprofit. It's a leadership training and job placement organization for people exactly like that woman, where I know I want to help the world, I'm not sure what I want to do. So we put them through a 6-month training, which can be done from anywhere in the world, and they come in and they're met with an executive coach, someone that helps them figure out what qualities they want to cultivate. They go through a curriculum that's part meditation, part community organizing training, so they can actually go into diverse communities and empower people within them. And then just traditional leadership structures that are not often taught. Qualities like, how do you run a meeting? How do you fundraise? How do you negotiate? How do you give and receive feedback? And then, ideally, and so far so good for our first 2 classes, they come through the other end and they say, actually, I really want to go into education reform. And then we find them a mentor in that field and we start networking with them to get them that work. So ideally, it's becoming a factory of these compassionate leaders that have that sense of self-awareness as they go into the world. And I mention all that because one of the things that we teach in that is a section in this book known as the 6 Ways of Ruling. This is a very ancient text. There's a time in Tibet where all of the various monasteries had their individual ways of doing things, and then they realized that if they kept doing that, that essentially, A, it would become completely different from monastery to monastery, and B, that if any of those places burned to the ground, which many did, that knowledge would be lost. So a lot of these great scholars came forward and decided they were going to capture the knowledge in writing and really make it coherent. And during that time, there's a gentleman known as Mipam Rinpoche, and he wrote a text in the 1800s known as The Way of the King, and then that was brought into the more public eye very recently, in the last 15 or so years, by Sakyang Mipam Rinpoche, who's my Buddhist teacher. And it's known as the 6 Ways of Ruling, which is thankfully a little bit less gender specific. But the 6 Ways of Ruling are basic leadership structures that help us show up at work in a way that is of benefit to others. So I thought maybe for this time I could do them very briefly, and we could go forward from that framework. And after that we'll do a guided meditation. I'll give you guys 4 tips for setting up a meditation practice at home. And then if you guys have one-on-one questions, I'm happy to answer them during the book signing portion. But the 6 Ways of Ruling, it starts with the idea of being benevolent, which is not just being like super, super kind, although that's nice. The idea of benevolence here is actually giving a lot of space for aggression to play out. And I think, what Susie was saying before, it's pretty relevant. We all have structures at work that we feel people are being speedy, they're being chaotic, they're not knowing what they're doing, they're being aggressive. How much can we give a wide open field for that? I think it was Suzuki Roshi that gave the analogy of a wild, raging bull. If you've ever seen a rodeo, you know that when you poke that bull and you rile it up, it gets really, really intense, and it doesn't have space in that small pen to exert itself. And it gets even angrier. And that's what a lot of us are like when we're hooked by anger. And then also when we're confronted with people who are angry and we sort of shoot rapid fire emails back and forth, and we're not very mindful about our email communication, that ends up actually fueling the fire. So the idea here is to actually open the pen door and let that bull out and let it run around in a wide and spacious field until it exhausts itself. Because that's what anger does, right? We know this in our own experience. When the fuel isn't being constantly poured on the fire, it goes out. So to give ourselves and others that sense of spaciousness is a real gift. And it's actually an absolute compassion activity. So that's one of these 6. And then another, it's actually, the next one is true. And I'm going to go a little Buddhist on you. I hope you're okay with that. In fairness, it is called The Buddha Walks into the Office, so. But the Buddha was a guy like you and me. I want to make that very clear. He was a human being who, through the practice of meditation, was able to wake up in a very, very big way. He's able to see through the layers of confusion and actually manifest the sense of awake that we were talking about before. And it's said that we all possess that same potential, that we all possess what in the Buddhist world is called Buddha nature, that we're not inherently basically messed up, we're basically good. That's who we are. And within that framework, we could also say we're basically wise, we're basically kind, we're basically strong, capable enough, we're basically worthy. My teacher, Sakyong Nipam Rinpoche, has been using that word, basically worthy, which I think is such a lovely way of shifting that framework. But the idea here is, underneath all the confusion that we have and that others have, we're basically good. So true is actually being true and having some sense of conviction in your experience of that, that maybe you're not basically messed up, that maybe basically you have everything you need. And it's not just you and me and the people in this room, but it's everyone. So when you are encountering that jerk at the office, you can come at it not just from the framework of, I'm basically good, so I'm probably right, but they're also basically good. And maybe that shifts the dynamic from me versus you versus we're in this together. Just like me, that thing that we were doing before. So being true to our conviction, our own goodness, and that of others. The third, and I'm sort of going rapid fire, but that's the beauty of having a book, that I can do that and then you can read more about it. The third is genuine. Genuine isn't just showing up and being authentic, although it's certainly a good start to this whole process. Genuine is being present enough to a situation that you genuinely see what's going on. A traditional analogy for this is that if we went outside at night and I pointed at a star, I'd say, that's a star. And none of you would say, that's an air conditioner, right? You would know, you could see it with your own eyes. That's a star. So sort of seeing a situation at work clearly enough that you understand the logic around it and you can point to it in such a clear way that others get on board. Does that make sense? Okay. The next is fearless, or fearlessness, which is not to say that, particularly in today's work environment, there is a lot of fear. And people worry about job loss, and budget cuts, and all sorts of things. And particularly, a lot of people my age, they have a startup that they do every other year. They're like, I hope my startup doesn't fail. Which of course means that they fear that it will. Fearlessness here is not being without fear. Fearlessness is actually looking fear in the eyes and leaning in and seeing your way through it. It's a little bit like if we went to the beach and we were standing there and a giant wave came crashing down on us and swept us out. You know that if you kicked and fought and screamed against it, you would only get pulled out more. But if you were able, as that wave crashed onto you, to dive in, you would actually come out the other side feeling refreshed. You'd be fine. So the idea of fearlessness here is diving into that wave, whatever that wave of fear might actually be, as opposed to kicking and screaming and pulled out by it, because that perpetuates it. So as hard as it is, I'd say 95% of Buddhist logic and even the meditation practice itself is like, it's easy to say, hard to do. So just being with fear as it arises. The fifth of these 6 ways is artful, which is, there's so many different types. There's artful communication, being very clear in how we communicate, what we communicate. So for example, if we're running a business, the board of directors of that business might need very specific financial information. The administrative assistant down the hall, he just needs to know that he's going to get paid on time. So being artful with how we communicate and what we communicate. Artful with our timing. And just artful with empowering others. So one gentleman, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, a very great Tibetan Buddhist teacher, said that he, in establishing his organization, would give people just enough rope to hang themselves and hope that they wouldn't. It's that sense of, I trust you, I empower you, I train you, and that's what happens from now on. And it's really easy to just say, I have to do it all. I'm like this, I do this. But to empower others in ways that make sense. And this is also getting back to like building out your kingdom. I mean, this was originally called the Way of the King. So if you're at the center, who are your ministers that support your work and will always give you advice? Who are the generals, the people that protect you and have your back? Who are the educators, people you go to when you don't know what to do and you need specific resources? So actually building out and empowering people in very specific ways. That's artful. Because ruling our work situation is not a science, it's an art. And then finally, rejoicing. I love this one more and more now that I'm actually out on tour talking about it, because I think a lot of us slog through our work and we don't celebrate what we're doing. We say, okay, I got through the week. But if we could actually take some time at the end of our day to think through whatever accomplishments may have arisen, even if it is, I lived a little bit more in line with that intention of being present, of being kind, of being generous, whatever it is for you personally. And then celebrating those 3 moments in the day that you actually did that. And knowing that if there were 0 moments, you don't have to beat yourself up and tomorrow's another day. And I talk about a friend of mine who's a meditation practitioner, and she is also a school teacher. And every year as the kids get let out of school, she sits down and she writes the list. And it's all the things that she feels proud about. It's, you know, I stood up for those teachers that were getting bullied by that particular set of parents. I taught that one kid who was really struggling how to read. Things like that. And actually looking that over, and that gives her motivation even when times get really tough with her job. She's incredibly frustrated. She looks at that and she says, this is why I'm doing it, for those successes. So rejoicing in what we actually do accomplish on a regular basis, I think is really important, and it's not often done in our work environment.
I just wanted to say thank you to you so much, Lodro, because that was really incredible. And I want to thank also Focus Magazine who filmed this today, so that if you want to watch it or share it with any of your friends. And I'm excited to share this book with everyone, and if you want to buy a book, please do so, and Lodro will be outside signing them. So thank you all so much for coming.